All right. So my read of this. So you're having more and more of the moderate opposition trying to resign from the cabinet and express opposition to Netanyahu. Um, I go back to Elon Papi. There's no such thing as a liberal Israeli, but they're trying to save the whole Israeli project. I think this is why they're trying to distance themselves from Netanyahu. I think they're starting to realize the only play here is you got to try to convince the world that Netanyahu was our Hitler and we're just Germans.
Right.
Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot, centrist members of Israel's war cabinet, announced on Sunday night they would resign from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's emergency government, deepening the country's political turmoil as it struggles to manage global fallout from the war in Gaza and escalating hostilities along its border with Lebanon. Quote, unfortunately, Netanyahu is preventing us from achieving real victory, Gantz said in a televised primetime broadcast, making the case that new leadership was needed to steer Israel through its widening crisis. Netanyahu had made empty promises of total victory, he said, rather than crafting a day after plan for the war in Gaza, acting decisively against Hezbollah in the north and working toward a ceasefire and hostage release deal with Hamas. Netanyahu reacted before Gantz had even finished speaking, posting on X, quote, Israel is in an existential war on several fronts. Benny, this is not the time to abandon the war. This is the time to join forces. Gantz is considered Netanyahu's top political rival, regularly besting him in public opinion polls when Israelis are asked who is best fit to lead the country. Though his resignation does not immediately threaten Netanyahu's coalition, it could lead to a political chain reaction, analysts said, and embolden the prime minister's many critics at home and abroad. An hour after Gantz spoke, Gadi Eisenkot, a former chief of staff of the Israeli army who joined the war cabinet, and Israeli minister Chili Tropper, submitted their own resignation letters. Quote, we have witnessed that the decisions made by the government and by you are not necessarily motivated by national considerations and the good of the country, Eisenkot wrote to Netanyahu. Foreign and political considerations have infiltrated the discussion rooms and influenced the decision making. Now, this is a big takeaway here. Now, this gives you the impression there's a lot of resistance to Netanyahu. Netanyahu still maintains a 64-seat majority in the 120-member Knesset, Israel's parliament, but more defections could be coming. So when you're told Netanyahu does not represent Israel, well, how does he have a 64-seat majority even with a wave of defection? So what was it before? 68-seat majority
Right.
before these resignations? It was precisely because of the urgent threats facing the nation, Gantz said, that he could no longer serve in the war cabinet. Quote, fateful strategic decisions are met with hesitancy and procrastination due to political considerations, he said Sunday. In the fall, a year since the disaster of October 7th, there should be elections that will eventually establish a government that will win the trust of the people and be able to face challenges. In the aftermath of October 7th, the deadliest single attack in Israel's history, Netanyahu set up a limited 6-member war cabinet, ensuring his own position at the head of government while excluding his extremist coalition partners from taking part in strategic decisions about the war in Gaza. So there are people that Netanyahu kept out of the cabinet because they're too extreme for him. They're too extreme, or probably not too extreme for him, so extreme that they would be too much of a political liability. The participation of Gantz and his party, quote, gave a broad swath of Israelis a higher level of confidence that critical wartime decisions were being made with moderate voices in the room and broad national representation rather than narrow political interests, said Yohanan Plesner, president of the Israel Democracy Institute, a nonpartisan Israeli think tank. A recent IDI poll found plummeting support for the government across the board, Plesner said, and he expected Gantz's departure to further fuel public discontent. Nationwide protests have grown in recent weeks, led by hostage families and their supporters who fear time is running out for those still inside Gaza. Gantz delayed his announcement by one day following a dramatic Israeli military operation on Saturday, which rescued 4 hostages from Gaza and spurred celebrations across the country.
And killed 274 civilians, but the Washington Post doesn't mention that.
I was just going to say, again, Israelis increasingly, as they're starting to understand the level of international isolation they are facing post-war, are increasingly trying to hang it on Netanyahu. But in the end, these people celebrated in a spirit of national unity in spite of 274 Palestinians being killed for the rescue of 4 hostages.
Who they could have gotten back without killing any of them, because a full hostage release was on the table months ago.
Right. Exactly. So when they tell you this is all Netanyahu's fault, which I think this is not the beginning of it, this is the middle of it. This is we started really seeing that push about 2 months ago to blame everything on Netanyahu, and try to in that way preserve Israel's ability to function on the world stage. This is kind of the second act of that effort, I think. On Saturday, I mark my words, when this is over and Netanyahu's out of office, they're going to make noises about prosecuting him and blaming him, maybe even try to give him up as a war criminal to the ICC to save themselves. On Saturday, Gantz said that, along with the justified joy of the achievement, it should be remembered that all the challenges that Israel faces regarding the return of the other 120 hostages and the other security challenges remain as they were. Netanyahu, the country's longest-serving prime minister. That's pretty funny for a guy who doesn't represent Israel, being the longest-serving prime minister. How did that happen? I thought it was the only democracy in the Middle East.
Right.
Well, so how could that not reflect the will of the Israeli people? Has never accepted responsibility for the failures of October 7th. He has waved away calls for investigating security lapses that day, saying such questions should be examined after the war. Others have not waited. Hours before Gantz's speech on Sunday, Brigadier General Avi Rosenfeld, the head of the Israeli military's Gaza division at the time of the Hamas-led attack, announced he would resign from his position. I failed in my life's mission to protect the Gaza border community, said Rosenfeld. Everyone has to take responsibility for their part. Well, not Netanyahu.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, you put the word moderate in quotes, as I kind of did for the thumbnail here,
Right,
because
right.
Gantz's main dispute with the far right in Israel, as I understand, is that Gantz did not want to see an expansive war against Lebanon, whereas Gvir did. In terms of going in and leveling Gaza, there doesn't seem to be any real opposition to that. And you've seen a couple of policy think tanks put out pieces about, will this strengthen the quote-unquote far right in Israel, which unthinkably to us does not include Netanyahu. No, there's people to the right of Netanyahu.
Yes.
Will
that
this
he kept
embolden...
out of the war cabinet.
Exactly, yes. Will this embolden Netanyahu? Will this embolden the far right? My question is, does this further embolden Netanyahu? Because now Netanyahu may consolidate the quote-unquote left-wing support in Israel. I mean, I can't even say that without laughing, but that's the framing. The framing here is that, Netanyahu's a right-wing government, then you have the far right, then you have the quote-unquote centrist in this guy who just quit, which basically rendered the emergency government now a thing of the past. That's why he's calling for a new campaign. So the question is, does this hurt Netanyahu as much as the headlines look like it does? It might not. It might not. I mean, this might consolidate the anti-Ben Gvir wing opposition. Who
Yeah,
knows?
Netanyahu the dove.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I mean,
What?
by comparison, that's what it's going to look like now, more than a few days ago. Now, in whose eyes, I can't imagine taking any of this all that seriously. But when you look at the shakeup now that this might cause, people are worried that this is going to embolden the right. It could just embolden Netanyahu, and this is really the worst of all worlds, where you have this state on a rampage, and you have the leader in a very, very insecure spot within his own government. So he is going to be doubly, if not triply, committed to prosecuting this war through to the end. Even Joe Biden said he is pursuing this war to the end for political reasons. Even Biden said that.
Yeah. And we, in regards to whether Netanyahu reflects the will of the Israeli people, we covered this months ago. This was not long after October 7th, maybe a month or two. There was a story in either WAPO or the New York Times, I can't remember which, where all of these liberal Israelis who had been marching against Netanyahu's government when he tried to change the judicial oversight laws in the country. I can't remember all the details of that. You know what I'm talking about. He's trying to change the
trying
court's
to disempower the
jurisdiction.
court. Yeah, he was trying to disempower the court. Yeah.
They were marching against this. There were all these groups. They considered themselves very liberal. And as soon as this war broke out, they changed their mission to supporting the war effort very proudly. You had all these gay, of course, they pushed them right out the article, the gay Israelis who had come from France and had been thinking about going back to France, but now realize this is our true home and we must stay here in its moment of crisis. There are no fucking liberal Israelis. They're all fucking responsible for this.
Please clap.